This case involves a death investigation and a concealed pregnancy. Nothing described here is graphic, but if this isn't the kind of case you want to sit with today, there are other stories on this channel waiting for you. If you're still here, stay close. What happened in this small Illinois town in 1883 still divides the people who study it today. Before we go further, kindly subscribe to this channel. There's a case like this one waiting every week. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Weeks earlier, she had been picking out a wedding date. The law never gave justice, and an entire town decided to deliver its own verdict. Her name was Zora Burns. She was born in Missouri around 1861. Her family moved while she was still an infant to St. Elmo, a small farming settlement in southern Illinois. Her father worked as a wagon maker, one of the trades that kept a town like this running, since horses and wagons were still the backbone of local life. Zora was 3 years old when her mother died. Her father remarried, and his new wife took over the household. Growing up in rural Illinois in that decade, the future was already narrow. Schooling came in short bursts between farm seasons. Daughters were expected to work, whether that meant sewing, farm labor, or going into someone else's home as a servant. Nobody in St. Elmo could have known that Zora's choice of employer would end her life before her 21st birthday. In late 1882, at 19 years old, she left her father's house and traveled to Lincoln, Illinois, the county seat of Logan County, to take a position as a domestic servant. The man who hired her was Orrin Carpenter. Carpenter was 50 years old. He was a grain dealer who owned a large grain farmland and other real estate scattered across the county. In a place like Logan County, grain dealers held real power. They decided what farmers were paid for their harvest. Carpenter was, by most contemporary accounts, one of the wealthiest men in the region. He was married, had 2 daughters, and carried the kind of reputation few people in a small town ever thought to question. Zora's work in his household was ordinary: cooking, cleaning, keeping the home running. Her pay was $1.50 a week, food and lodging included. It was a modest wage, even for the time, and it would not stay unquestioned for long. Within a few months, Zora told Carpenter she intended to leave. She wanted better pay, and she was prepared to walk away without it. Carpenter didn't let her go. Instead, he offered her an expensive pair of shoes and promised an extra $1 a week. Then came the condition that mattered more than anything else in the offer. She was not to tell his wife. Sit with that for a moment. A wealthy, married employer, twice her age, asking a teenage servant to keep a financial secret from the woman running the household beside him. It is the kind of arrangement that, on its own, might mean nothing. Domestic servants in the 1880s had almost no protection. A young woman like Zora lived under her employer's roof, ate at his table, and depended entirely on his goodwill for her wage and her lodging. If a powerful man decided he wanted more from that arrangement than a servant's labor, there was very little standing in his way. By September 1883, Zora left the Carpenter household for good. Before returning to her father's home, she spent time staying with a woman named Mrs. Dingler on the outskirts of Lincoln. It was there, in that house, that Zora said something out loud for the first time. She was pregnant, and she told Mrs. Dingler exactly who she believed was responsible. Neither woman could have known how much that quiet conversation would matter in a few short weeks. For a while, it looked like Zora's story was turning toward something better. Visiting her older sister in Wayne, Illinois, she met a man named Dukes, her brother-in-law's brother. The two moved quickly. By fall, they were engaged, planning a wedding for the end of October. She was building a life that had nothing to do with Orrin Carpenter. Almost nothing. There was still the matter of money. Zora told her father she needed one more trip back to Lincoln, that Carpenter still owed her wages from her time in his household, and that she meant to collect it herself. On Friday, October 12, 1883, she boarded a train and made the 80-mile trip back to Lincoln. She said nothing to her father about the conversation she'd had with Mrs. Dingler weeks earlier. As far as her family knew, this was simply a matter of unpaid wages. The next evening, Saturday, October 13th, witnesses placed Carpenter with Zora at his office in Lincoln. Sunday came, and Zora didn't come home. Her family waited. They told themselves there was an explanation. There always is, until there isn't. Monday morning, October 15th, 1883. A rural road on the outskirts of Lincoln, the kind of stretch few people had reason to travel. A place like that isn't found by accident. Someone who chose it likely knew the area, knew it would be quiet, knew a body could lie there for a while before anyone came across it. Zora Burns was found there that morning. She had been fatally attacked. Whoever found her that day understood immediately that this was no accident. Word moved fast, and authorities were called to the scene. In St. Elmo, the news reached William Burns. He made the trip to Lincoln and stood over his daughter's body to confirm what no father wants to confirm. Witnesses that day remembered him shaking, barely able to process what was in front of him. Then came the detail that changed everything. A medical examination confirmed that Zora had been several months pregnant when she died. Only one other person alive had known that before this moment, Mrs. Dingler. A missing servant girl found dead outside a small Illinois town might have stayed a local story, one paragraph in a county paper and nothing more. A pregnant young woman, engaged to be married in 2 weeks, found dead days after quietly returning to the home of her wealthy former employer, was something else entirely. This was about to become one of the most talked about cases in the state. Before we get into how investigators actually built their case against the man everyone in Lincoln was already whispering about, if this story has you hooked, take a second and subscribe. This channel is built entirely around cases like this one. Now, back to Logan County. Investigators moved fast, and the first name on their list wasn't Carpenter. It was Dukes, Zora's own fiancé. There were real reasons to look at him. He had a visibly injured right hand and refused to say how he'd gotten it. Then investigators found something Zora herself apparently never knew. Dukes was secretly engaged to a second woman, Elizabeth for real, in the town of Kiwana. He had been planning 2 weddings at once, to 2 different women, and neither of them knew about the other. For a moment, it looked like the case might be simple. A man caught in a lie, hiding an injury, engaged to someone he hadn't married yet. That's the kind of profile investigators build a case around. But his alibi held. Multiple witnesses, including the local postmaster in Wayne, placed him there the entire weekend Zora died. He was nowhere near Lincoln. Police kept watching him anyway for a while, unwilling to let go of a man who had already lied to 2 women at once. But there was nothing. No evidence, no gap in the timeline, nothing that put him anywhere near that road. He was never charged. That left investigators with only one name still standing. Orrin Carpenter. Piece by piece, the case against Carpenter came together, and it came together fast. Neighbors told police they'd seen Carpenter and Zora together far more than any employer and servant should be, both during and after her time in his household. Some sightings went beyond Lincoln entirely. One account placed the 2 of them at a hotel in Peoria, where Carpenter had allegedly checked them in under a false relationship, a detail meant, investigators believed, to keep anyone from asking questions. Then came the letters. Zora's father told police he had correspondence written by Carpenter to his daughter, some of it containing money. A woman named Rebecca Carpenter, no relation to Orrin, came forward and said she had personally seen letters between the 2, letters that suggested something far beyond employer and servant. And then there was Mrs. Dingler, the one person Zora had trusted with the truth before she died. She repeated what Zora had told her. She was pregnant, Carpenter was the father, and he had given her money and gifts as part of what she described as an ongoing relationship. The physical evidence came next, and it's the kind of detail that makes a case feel real. Police examined Carpenter's buggy, the vehicle he used constantly, and found stains on the seat. Tested under a microscope, they came back consistent with blood. Investigators in 1883 couldn't determine whether it was human. The science simply didn't exist yet. But in the seat cushions, they also found hairpins, the same type Zora used, the same type she had been carrying when she was found. Not everything pointed toward guilt. One newspaper reported that no comparable stains turned up on Carpenter's whip, a gap his defense would later seize on. But by late October 1883, investigators believed they had enough. The letters, the witnesses, the buggy. Orrin Carpenter, one of the wealthiest, most respected men in Logan County, was arrested on suspicion of murder. What happened next should have been straightforward. It wasn't. The coroner's inquest was held under unusual secrecy, tighter than almost anything the reporters covering it had seen before. They were shut out of the room entirely and had to chase down witnesses afterward just to piece together what had been said inside. That's how the public first learned the detail Carpenter's side had fought hardest to keep quiet. Zora had been pregnant. Once that fact reached the newspapers, this stopped being a story about a young woman's death. It became a story about what a powerful man might do to protect a secret. And then came the verdict that left almost everyone unsatisfied. The coroner's jury ruled that Zora Burns had died at the hands of a person or persons unknown. No name attached. Carpenter walked out on $10,000 bail, a striking sum for the time, to await review by a grand jury. Lincoln did not take that quietly. Many residents believed Carpenter's money and connections had shaped the jury's decision, and it didn't help that some of the jurors were reportedly his own business associates. Tension in the county rose high enough that the state militia was placed on alert, a small town bracing for something it hoped wouldn't happen. Two strange, unrelated leads only muddied things further. A jeweler in another town said two men had sold him rings, one bearing Zora's name. A man in Iowa claimed he'd been paid to kill her. Neither lead held up, but both gave Carpenter's supporters something to point to, and both kept the public guessing. Newspapers made another comparison that stuck. They placed Zora's case alongside the unsolved death of a young woman named Rose Ambler, a case that had gripped the country only months earlier. Two young women, two deaths, no convictions in either. In January 1884, a grand jury indicted Carpenter. This time, there was no bail. His lawyers argued the case had been tried in the press before it ever reached a courtroom, and a judge agreed. The trial would move to Petersburg, in the neighboring county. Everyone involved understood what came next would decide everything. March 10, 1884. Petersburg. The prosecution laid out a theory that was simple to say and difficult to prove. Carpenter and Zora, they argued, had been involved in a secret relationship that led to her pregnancy. When the situation couldn't be handled quietly, it turned violent. The defense went straight for the gaps. Every witness had described letters between Carpenter and Zora. Not one of those letters was ever produced in court. The buggy evidence existed, but no blood-stained clothing tied to Carpenter was ever found. And Carpenter himself never took the stand, a decision that spared him from being questioned directly about Peoria, about the letters, about any of it. Reporters covering the trial noticed something that unsettled a lot of people watching from Logan County. Carpenter seemed to be treated less like a man on trial for murder and more like a guest of the court. There were reports he dined with the sheriff while awaiting trial. Several of Petersburg's most prominent citizens had thrown their support behind his defense. The jury deliberated, and on March 21, 1884, they delivered their verdict. Not guilty. The courtroom in Petersburg accepted it. Logan County did not. Word of the acquittal reached Lincoln fast, and the town's answer came just as fast. Within days, a printed notice was circulating, calling residents to a public meeting. Roughly 4,000 people showed up, an extraordinary number for a county seat that size in 1884. That's not a crowd. That's most of the town. The decision they reached was simple and final. Warren Carpenter was no longer welcome in Logan County. A committee of 75 men was chosen to deliver that message to him in person. Carpenter refused to leave quietly. He denied any involvement in Zora's death and disputed that a crowd of angry citizens had any authority to force him out of a place where he still legally owned land and businesses. But the pressure kept building. William Burns, Zora's father, began telling people openly that he intended to confront the man he believed had killed his daughter. He was seen walking through town armed. He was talked down once. Then, in December 1884, the two men crossed paths again. Burns discharged a firearm in Carpenter's direction. No one was struck. It was enough. Not long after, Carpenter sold everything he owned in Illinois and moved his family to Dakota Territory, far from the county that had turned on him. What had once been a considerable fortune had shrunk badly under the weight of his legal defense and the collapse of his standing at home. No one else was ever charged with Zora Burns' death. More than 140 years later, no physical evidence survives to be tested with modern forensic tools. There has been no DNA analysis, no reopening of the file, no quiet breakthrough waiting to be announced. If you want more cases like this, kindly click on your subscribe button and turn on notifications for new cases.